The scent of lemon polish and old money clung to the air at the Gilded Sparrow, a fragrance Clara Vance had come to associate with a quiet, gnawing anxiety. Each evening, she would smooth the starched white apron over her black uniform, the fabric a flimsy shield against the world. She'd tie her auburn hair into a tight, severe bun, erasing any trace of the woman who had, just an hour before, been crushing pills into applesauce for her 7-year-old son, Leo. Leo was her world, a small, bright sun around which her entire universe revolved. But his light was fragile, threatened by the long shadow of cystic fibrosis. His treatments were a relentless drain, a financial black hole that swallowed every dollar she earned and then some. The Gilded Sparrow, with its clientele of stockbrokers and society dames, was her best hope. The tips, on a good night, could mean the difference between a full prescription and a partial one, between a nebulizer treatment at home and a terrifying rush to the emergency room. Tonight, the air was particularly heavy with expectation. A low, reverent hush had fallen over the dining room. Julian Croft was here. Even those who didn't know his name knew his aura. He radiated a kind of dangerous energy, a restless power that seemed to warp the very space around him. He was handsome in a severe, sculpted way, with eyes the color of a winter sky and a mouth that looked as if it had never known a genuine smile. He was seated at table 12, the prime real estate overlooking the city lights, flanked by 2 Japanese businessmen who looked impeccably tailored and deeply serious. Clara was assigned his section. Her stomach tightened. Mr. Croft was notoriously difficult, a man who treated service staff as inconvenient furniture. He demanded perfection and rewarded it with disdain. Water, still, Icelandic if you have it. The bottle must be opened at the table, he'd snapped without looking at her, his attention fixed on his phone. Clara had provided it, her movements fluid and unobtrusive, a ghost in a black dress. For the next 2 hours, she orbited their table, a silent satellite of service. She anticipated every need, refilling glasses before they were empty, clearing plates with ghost-like efficiency, describing the specials with a calm, practiced warmth that belied the frantic calculations running through her head. The co-pay for Leo's new medication is $280. A 20% tip on this bill could cover almost half of that. Please, just be decent. The dinner was a tense affair. Mr. Croft's smiles toward his guests were thin and brittle. His phone buzzed intermittently, and with each glance a new layer of ice seemed to form over his features. He was losing something, Clara could tell, a deal, a contract, a battle of wills. He was a predator who had missed his kill, and now he was prowling his cage, looking for something, anything, to tear apart. His gaze fell on Clara as she presented the dessert menus. "We're not interested," he said, his voice a low growl, "just the check." As she returned with the leather-bound bill folder, she placed it discreetly on the table, her heart hammered against her ribs. The total was astronomical, well over $1,000. A good tip would be a godsend. She waited at a respectful distance, her eyes cast downward, trying to will a sliver of generosity into the man's cold heart. He spent an eternity scrutinizing the bill, his finger tracing each line item as if searching for fraud. Then he produced a platinum credit card, placing it in the folder with a dismissive flick. Clara retrieved it, processed the payment, and returned with the final slip for him to sign and add a gratuity. This was the moment of truth. The air crackled. He picked up the pen, a sleek silver instrument that probably cost more than her monthly rent. He made a single angry slash across the signature line, then, with deliberate theatrical slowness, he drew a thick black line through the space marked tip and wrote a large, emphatic 0. Clara felt the air leave her lungs. It was more than just the money. It was the deliberate cruelty of it, the dismissal of her effort, of her very existence. But she kept her face a placid mask, the first rule of survival in this world. She reached for the folder. A moment, Julian Croft's voice sliced through the silence. He looked directly at her for the first time all night, and his eyes were filled with a chilling contempt. "I want you to understand why you're receiving nothing." His guests shifted uncomfortably, the surrounding tables quieted, conversations faltering as diners sensed the brewing storm. "You see," he began, his voice carrying through the hushed room, "I pay for excellence. I reward skill. What you do, this is not a skill. Carrying plates, pouring water, A trained monkey could do it. You are a placeholder, a temporary cog in a machine, easily replaced and utterly forgettable. You add no value. Therefore, you earn no reward beyond your meager wage. Perhaps this will be a lesson for you. Aim higher, be better, or this is all you will ever be. Each word was a physical blow. Humiliation, hot and sharp, washed over Clara. She could feel the eyes of every patron on her, their pity a fresh layer of shame. She kept her chin up, her gaze fixed on a point just over his shoulder. "Thank you for your feedback, sir," she managed, her voice a strained whisper. "I hope you enjoyed your meal." She reached again for the bill, her only desire to flee, but as her fingers brushed the leather, his hand shot out. He picked up his crystal goblet, still half full of the expensive Icelandic water he had demanded. With a look of pure, unadulterated malice, he tilted his wrist and emptied the entire glass onto her. The icy water shocked her system. It soaked the front of her apron and blouse, clinging to her skin, a cold, spreading stain of degradation. A collective gasp rippled through the dining room. The two Japanese businessmen stared, their faces masks of disbelief and embarrassment. Julian Croft leaned back in his chair, a smug, triumphant smirk on his lips. He had found something to break after all. "A clumsy mistake," he said, his voice dripping with false sincerity. "You should be more careful." Clara stood there dripping and shivering in the center of the opulent restaurant. The world seemed to slow down. She saw not the stunned faces of the wealthy diners, but the pale, trusting face of her son, Leo. She felt not the cold water, but the crushing weight of the medical bills on her kitchen table. In that moment, something inside her, something that had been bent and battered for years, did not break. It hardened into steel. The silence that followed the deluge was profound, a vacuum that sucked all the air and warmth from the room. It was a silence punctuated only by the soft, rhythmic drip of water from Clara's apron onto the polished marble floor. Drip, drip, drip. Each drop was an echo of her humiliation. Her manager, Robert, a man whose spine seemed to be made of gelatin, scurried over. His face was pale, his eyes darting nervously between the furious storm cloud that was Julian Croft and the drenched, statue-still form of his employee. "Mr. Croft, is everything all right? My deepest apologies for this inconvenience," Robert stammered, already siding with power, already throwing Clara under the bus. He shot her a venomous look, a silent command to disappear. But Clara didn't move. She was frozen, not by the cold or the shock, but by a sudden glacial rage. It was a rage so pure and so deep it felt calming. She looked at Julian Croft, truly looked at him, past the expensive suit and the arrogant sneer. She saw a small, hollow man, a man so terrified of his own failures that he had to build himself up by tearing others down. And in that moment, she no longer felt shame. She felt a profound, almost pitying contempt. "Get her out of here," Croft commanded, waving a dismissive hand at Robert, "and bring me someone competent to finish this." Robert practically grabbed Clara's arm. "To the back now," he hissed, his fingers digging into her bicep. "You're causing a scene." Clara allowed herself to be led away, her steps measured and deliberate. She could feel the burn of 100 pairs of eyes on her back. As she passed through the swinging doors into the chaotic, steamy world of the kitchen, the cacophony of clattering pans and shouting chefs washed over her. A few of her colleagues stopped and stared. Maria, a kindly older waitress with tired eyes, rushed forward with a dry towel. "That animal," Maria muttered, dabbing at Clara's soaked blouse. "I saw the whole thing. He should be arrested." But Clara barely heard her. She was walking toward her locker at the far end of the narrow changing room. Her mind was unnaturally clear. For years she had accepted her lot. She had smiled through insults, endured condescension, and absorbed the casual cruelty of people who saw her as less than human. All for Leo. She had told herself that dignity was a luxury she couldn't afford. She was wrong. Dignity was all she had left. She opened her small metal locker. Tucked inside, behind a faded photograph of a smiling young man in an army uniform, was a worn, creased envelope. The paper was thick, creamy, and embossed with a seal that was instantly recognizable to anyone in the world. It was her anchor, her most treasured possession. It was a letter she read on the nights when the hospital bills seemed insurmountable, and the weight of being both mother and father was too much to bear. It was a reminder that honor and sacrifice were real, that they existed in a world far removed from the petty cruelties of men like Julian Croft. Her late husband, Sergeant Michael Vance, had died in a firefight in Kandahar, pulling 2 wounded men from a burning vehicle before succumbing to his own injuries. He had been awarded the Medal of Honor posthumously. Clara, a young widow clutching a folded flag, had received it from the President of the United States himself in a somber White House ceremony. A week later, this letter had arrived. It wasn't a form letter, it was personal, penned by the President's own hand on his private stationery. He had written of Michael's uncommon valor, of the nation's debt. But he had also written of the man he'd met briefly before Michael's final deployment, a man who spoke of nothing but his wife and his newborn son. He ended the letter with a promise. "Mrs. Vance, if you or your son should ever need anything, if you should ever find yourself facing a battle you cannot win alone, you have only to ask. Your family's sacrifice has earned you a debt of honor that this nation and I personally will always stand ready to repay." She had never considered using it. It felt sacred, a testament to a love and a life cut short. To use it for personal gain felt like a betrayal of Michael's memory. But this wasn't about personal gain. This was about honor. Julian Croft had spoken of value, of skill, of worth. He had passed judgment on her and found her wanting. He had no idea what true value was. Her fingers, still trembling slightly, closed around the envelope. She pulled out the single heavy sheet of paper. She folded it neatly and tucked it into the dry pocket of her apron. Then she turned and walked out of the kitchen. Maria tried to stop her. "Clara, what are you doing? Just go home. He's not worth it." Robert saw her emerge and his face went white with panic. "I told you to stay in the back. You're fired, Vance. Do you hear me? Fired." Clara ignored them both. She walked back into the silent dining room, her head held high. Every eye snapped back to her. She walked directly to table 12. Julian Croft looked up, his face a mask of fury and disbelief. "I thought I told them to get rid of you," he snarled. His Japanese guests looked on, their faces impassive but their eyes sharp and observant. They were watching a play unfold, a drama of character they hadn't anticipated. Clara did not say a word. She did not offer an excuse or an apology. She simply reached into her pocket, her movements graceful and deliberate. She placed the folded piece of paper on the table directly in front of Julian Croft's plate. It sat there, a small cream-colored rectangle, stark against the dark wood. Then she turned and walked away, not back to the kitchen, but toward the front door of the restaurant, leaving the note, the job, and the entire sordid scene behind her. She had no idea what would happen next, but for the first time in a very long time, she felt free. Julian Croft stared at the folded piece of paper as if it were a venomous snake. His first instinct was to sweep it to the floor, to dismiss it as the pathetic final act of a fired waitress. Perhaps it was a hastily scribbled complaint, a plea for her job, or some nonsense about her sick child that he was supposed to feel guilty about. He almost laughed at the audacity. "What is this?" he demanded of the empty air, his voice tight with irritation. He looked up, but Clara was already gone. The manager, Robert, was hovering nearby, wringing his hands. "Get this trash off my table." But one of his guests, the senior businessman, Mr. Tanaka, held up a placating hand. "Perhaps you should read it, Croft-san," he said, his English precise and his tone unreadable. "Curiosity is a virtue." There was a subtle challenge in his eyes, a flicker of something that made Julian pause. The deal with Tanaka's firm, a multi-billion-dollar tech merger, was hanging by a thread. He had been losing ground all week, outmaneuvered by a rival firm. This dinner was his last-ditch effort to salvage it by projecting an image of unshakable power and control. His outburst had already fractured that image. Ignoring the note now in front of them might look like fear. With a theatrical sigh of annoyance, Julian snatched the paper from the table. The texture of it surprised him. It wasn't cheap notepad paper. It was heavy, fibrous, with a watermark he couldn't quite make out in the dim light. He unfolded it, and the world stopped. At the top of the page, embossed in gold and navy blue, was the seal of the President of the United States. Beneath it, in elegant official script, were the words, "The White House, Washington." Julian's breath caught in his throat. This had to be a joke, a counterfeit, a prank. He forced his eyes to scan the typewritten lines, his brain struggling to process the words. "My dearest Mrs. Vance, I am writing to you not as a president to a citizen, but as one man to another, in awe of the courage your family has shown. I had the distinct honor of meeting your husband, Sergeant Michael Vance, before his final tour. He spoke with such profound love of you and your son, Leo. He showed me a small, wallet-sized photo of you both, and he called you his reason for everything. His actions in the moments before his death were the very definition of heroism. The word hero is used too often in our times, but it applies to Michael in its purest, most absolute form. He gave his life so that others might live. Our nation is forever in his debt, a debt that can never truly be repaid." Julian's eyes jumped to the bottom of the page. The signature was unmistakable, a bold, confident scrawl he had seen 1,000 times on legislation and in the news. It was the signature of President James Harrison, the current sitting President of the United States. Below it, a handwritten postscript. "P.S. Clara, my offer stands. The nation has not forgotten you. I have not forgotten you. If you ever need anything, my door is always open." The blood drained from Julian Croft's face. The paper trembled in his hand. The smug certainty, the arrogant superiority he had felt just moments before, evaporated, replaced by a cold, sickening dread. He hadn't just humiliated a waitress. He hadn't just poured water on some anonymous, unskilled worker. He had assaulted a Gold Star widow, a woman personally known to and honored by the most powerful man on the planet. He felt a sudden, dizzying vertigo, as if the marble floor beneath him had given way to a gaping abyss. The entire context of the evening shifted with terrifying speed. His petty cruelty was no longer a private display of dominance. It was an international incident playing out on the miniature stage of a restaurant dining room. Mr. Tanaka, ever observant, noticed the dramatic change in Julian's demeanor. The color of his face had gone from a healthy tan to a pasty, sickly gray. "Is something wrong, Croft-san?" he asked, his voice still quiet but now laced with a sharp edge of intrigue. Julian couldn't speak. His throat was tight, his mind racing. He tried to refold the letter, to hide it, but his fingers fumbled. The paper felt like it was burning his skin. Mr. Tanaka leaned forward slightly. "May I?" he asked, gesturing to the letter. It was not really a request. Numbly, Julian handed it over. He watched as Mr. Tanaka and his associate read the letter. There was no dramatic reaction. Their faces remained impassive, but a deep, profound understanding settled in their eyes. Mr. Tanaka read it twice, then folded it carefully and placed it back on the center of the table. He looked at Julian Croft, and for the first time the polite mask of the foreign businessman was gone. In its place was a look of utter and complete contempt, an expression so withering it made Julian feel like an insect. "In my culture, Croft-san," Mr. Tanaka said, his voice soft but carrying the weight of a judge's sentence, "we have a concept called giri. It is a complex idea, but it speaks to duty, to social obligation, to the honor of one's name. A man's character is not measured by the size of his bank account, but by how he treats those he is not obligated to be kind to." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "You have shown us your character tonight. You have shown us a man who finds strength in cruelty, who mistakes arrogance for power, and who would desecrate the honor of a hero's widow for a moment of petty satisfaction." Mr. Tanaka stood up, followed immediately by his associate. He carefully adjusted his suit jacket. "We will not be doing business with you, Croft-san," he stated, the words delivered with the finality of a guillotine. "Croft Innovations lacks a foundation of honor. We cannot build a future on such unstable ground." He gave a slight, formal bow, a gesture of pure, cutting politeness that was more insulting than any curse. Then he and his associate turned and walked out of the restaurant, leaving Julian Croft alone at the table with the $1,000 bill, the damning letter, and the smoking ruins of his multi-billion-dollar deal. Clara didn't run. She walked. Each step away from the Gilded Sparrow was a deliberate act of reclamation. The chilly night air hit her damp blouse, and she shivered, but it was a cleansing cold. She walked past the valets who averted their eyes, past the gleaming luxury cars parked along the curb, symbols of a world that had tried to crush her. She didn't look back. She had no plan. She had just lost the best-paying job she could get. Her savings were negligible, a pathetic buffer against the relentless onslaught of medical expenses. The rent was due in a week. Leo's prescription needed refilling tomorrow. By any rational measure, her impulsive act of defiance was a catastrophic mistake, a plunge into an even deeper abyss of financial ruin. And yet, she felt lighter than she had in years. The shame Julian Croft had tried to brand her with had been handed back to him, gift-wrapped in White House stationery. She had defended not just herself, but the memory of her husband. Michael had never backed down from a fight when honor was on the line, and in that moment she had felt his strength coursing through her. She reached the bus stop, the fluorescent lights of the shelter casting a sickly yellow glow. She sank onto the cold plastic bench, the adrenaline beginning to fade, replaced by a creeping, terrifying dread. What had she done? How would she feed her son? The weight of her decision began to settle upon her, heavy and suffocating. She buried her face in her hands, the image of Leo's trusting face making her heart ache. Back at the restaurant, chaos had erupted. Julian Croft sat paralyzed at his table for a full 10 minutes after Mr. Tanaka's departure. The letter lay before him like a verdict. The surrounding diners, who had witnessed the entire drama, were whispering furiously, their phones discreetly held up. The story was already spreading, a digital wildfire leaping from text to text, from one social media feed to another. The manager, Robert, finally found the courage to approach the table. "Mr. Croft? Sir? Is everything—" Julian snapped his head up, his eyes wild. "You," he snarled, pointing a trembling finger at Robert. "You hired her. You are responsible for this." "Sir, I fired her. Immediately, I handled it," Robert stammered, backing away. "You handled nothing," Julian roared, finally surging to his feet. He threw a wad of cash onto the table, far more than the bill, and stormed toward the exit, his face a thunderous mask of fury and panic. He had to get ahead of this. He had to call his PR team, his lawyers. He had to spin this, control the narrative. But the narrative was already a runaway train. By the time he got into his chauffeured Bentley, his phone was buzzing incessantly. The first call was from his company's head of public relations, a woman named Jessica who sounded like she was having a panic attack. "Julian, what the hell happened? My phone is blowing up. Someone from the Times just called me. They're asking for comment on an incident at the Gilded Sparrow involving you and a Gold Star widow." "A Gold Star widow, Julian? Please tell me this is a mistake." "It's being handled," he grunted, his stomach twisting into a painful knot. "Handled? Julian, a video is already online. Someone filmed you throwing the water on her. It has 50,000 views in the last 10 minutes. Julian felt the world tilt on its axis. A video. He squeezed his eyes shut. The image of his own smug face, the casual flick of his wrist, the splash of water. It was all out there for the world to see, stripped of context, a perfect tableau of rich man arrogance. The next call was from Marcus Thorne, a senior board member at Croft Innovations, and a man who held immense sway with their investors. "Julian," Marcus's voice was dangerously calm, "I've just had a call from Kenji Tanaka's office. He has formally withdrawn from the merger negotiations, citing irreconcilable differences in corporate culture and ethics. He also made a rather cryptic remark about honor. Do you have any idea what he might be talking about?" Julian's carefully constructed world was not just cracking. It was shattering into a million pieces. The deal, the culmination of 2 years of aggressive, ruthless work, was gone. Evaporated. All because of a moment of petty rage, because he had chosen the wrong person to bully. He spent the rest of the night in a frantic state of damage control. He issued a statement through his PR team, a weak, transparent apology for a misunderstanding, claiming the water spill was an accident. No one believed it. The video was too clear, his malice too evident. The term Gold Star Widow was now permanently attached to his name in every headline. Veterans groups issued furious condemnations. Politicians, smelling blood in the water, began making statements about the need for respect and decency. He had become, in the space of a few hours, a national pariah. Meanwhile, Clara sat on the bus as it rumbled through the darkened city streets. Her phone, a cheap model with a cracked screen, buzzed in her pocket. It was a text from Maria. "Clara, are you okay? The whole city is talking about you. You are a hero. That monster got what he deserved. Don't worry about the job. We'll figure something out." A hero? Clara almost laughed. She felt like a fool. She got off at her stop and walked the 2 blocks to her small, shabby apartment building. As she climbed the stairs, the weight of her reality pressed down on her again. The defiance felt good, but it didn't pay the rent. She quietly let herself into the apartment. Her neighbor, Mrs. Gable, a kind retiree who often watched Leo for her, was asleep in the armchair. Leo was tucked into his bed, a small lump under the covers, the soft hiss of his nebulizer machine filling the quiet room. Clara walked over and gently brushed the hair from his forehead. He was so small, so vulnerable. Her heart ached with a love so fierce it was painful. She had stood up for her honor, but had she jeopardized his future? The doubt came rushing back, a cold, dark tide. She sank into the chair beside his bed, pulling a worn blanket over herself, and for the first time that night she allowed the tears to fall, silent tears of fear and uncertainty, soaking into the cheap fabric of her still damp uniform. The next morning dawned grey and unforgiving, the light filtering through Clara's cheap blinds like diluted dishwater. She had barely slept, drifting in and out of a restless slumber filled with visions of eviction notices and empty medicine bottles. The brief, fiery empowerment of the previous night had cooled into the cold, hard ash of consequence. She made Leo his breakfast, her movements automated, her mind a maelstrom of panic. How much was left in her checking account? $112. How could she stretch that? She mentally sorted bills into piles of urgent and catastrophic. The pharmacy was catastrophic. Rent was catastrophic. Everything was catastrophic. She was scrolling through online job listings, fast food, cleaning services, anything, when her phone buzzed with an unknown number. She ignored it. It buzzed again and again. On the 4th try, she answered with a weary sigh, expecting a debt collector. "Is this Clara Vance?" a woman's voice asked. It was crisp, professional, and radiated an unnerving sense of authority. "Yes, who is this?" "My name is Eleanor Vance. I am the Chief of Staff for President Harrison." Clara froze, the phone feeling slick in her suddenly sweaty palm. For a moment, she thought it was a prank, a cruel joke. I'm sorry. Mrs. Vance, the President was made aware of an incident that occurred last night in which you were involved. A video of the event, along with a photograph of his letter to you, has come to his attention. He is deeply displeased. He asked me to reach out to you personally. Clara sank onto her worn-out sofa, her legs suddenly unable to support her. The President, the actual President of the United States, was aware of what had happened. The letter, her private sacred memento, was now public. "He wants to know if you are all right," Eleanor continued, her tone softening slightly. "And he wants me to reiterate the promise he made to you. He was very clear, Mrs. Vance. He said, and I quote, 'Tell her the debt of honor is real.'" Tears pricked Clara's eyes. I don't know what to say. I never intended for the letter to become public." "We understand," Eleanor said. "You were defending your husband's honor and your own. The President considers that an admirable act. Now we are aware you lost your position as a result of this. That is not acceptable. We would like to help. There is a fund, a discretionary account for situations just like this, for the families of our nation's heroes who find themselves in distress. We can arrange for your immediate financial burdens to be taken care of." Clara was speechless. It was a lifeline, a miracle descending from the highest office in the land. But something held her back. Michael had been a man of immense pride. He never took a handout. She was his wife. "Thank you," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "That is incredibly generous. But I can't. I need to work. I need to provide for my son on my own." It's what Michael would have wanted. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Clara thought she might have offended the woman. I understand, Eleanor said finally, a note of respect in her voice. In that case, perhaps there is another way. We have contacts in every sector. What kind of work would you be interested in, Mrs. Vance? If not in hospitality. Anything, Clara said, her voice barely a whisper. Anything with stable hours and health insurance for my son. Leave it with me, Eleanor said. You have the President's word. You will hear from us soon. The call ended. Clara stared at her phone, her mind reeling. The world had turned upside down twice in less than 24 hours. Meanwhile, Julian Croft was experiencing his own inversion of fortune. He was in his penthouse office, a glass-walled cage overlooking a city that now seemed to despise him. He hadn't slept. His face in the reflection was gaunt, his eyes bloodshot. He had been dropped by his PR firm that morning. The situation is untenable, they'd said. You're radioactive. The board had called an emergency meeting. He knew what was coming. They would demand his resignation as CEO of the company he had built from the ground up. His name, once a symbol of success and ruthless efficiency, was now a synonym for arrogant cruelty. He was a meme, a villain in a viral video. His intercom buzzed. Mr. Croft, his assistant's voice was shaky. There's a Mr. Peterson here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's urgent. Get rid of him, Julian snapped. Sir, he says he's from the Department of Justice. A new wave of cold dread washed over Julian. The Department of Justice? What could they possibly want? He buzzed his assistant back. Send him in. The man who entered was unassuming. He was in his late 50s, with greying hair and a kind, weary face. He wore a simple, off-the-rack suit that looked out of place in Julian's opulent office. He wasn't a federal agent. He looked like an accountant. Mr. Croft, the man said, extending a hand which Julian did not take. My name is Arthur Peterson. I'm a lawyer. You said you were from the DOJ, Julian accused. I am, Arthur said calmly. I work in the Office of Special Counsel, but I'm not here in an official capacity. I'm here because I was at the Gilded Sparrow last night. I was at the table next to yours. Julian stared at him. He remembered the man now, a quiet diner, half hidden in the shadows. I saw what you did, Mr. Croft, Arthur continued, his voice devoid of accusation, stating it as a simple fact. I saw you humiliate a woman who was doing her job with nothing but professionalism, and then I saw her response. I saw her give you that note. He took a step closer. I am also a veteran, Mr. Croft. I served 20 years in the Air Force JAG Corps. I know what that letter meant. I know the sacrifice it represents, and I know that when a man like the President makes a promise like that, it's not just words on paper. What do you want? Julian asked, his voice hoarse. Money? Are you representing her? Arthur let out a soft, sad laugh. Good heavens, no. I haven't even spoken to her. I'm here to give you a piece of free advice, man to man, because what you did wasn't just cruel, it was monumentally stupid. You poked a sleeping giant. I don't know what you're talking about, Julian lied. You poured water on a woman who is, for all intents and purposes, under the personal protection of the President of the United States. Arthur spelled it out slowly, as if explaining a complex concept to a child. You did it publicly. You did it on camera. The President, Mr. Croft, is a man who understands optics. He is also a man who has a deep and personal respect for the armed forces. He cannot, and will not, let this stand. He has to be seen to act. Arthur walked over to the window, looking down at the city below. Right now, I would wager that every federal agency with regulatory power over your business is being asked to take a very, very close look at Croft Innovations. The SEC will be looking at your stock trades. The IRS will be auditing your corporate and personal taxes back to the Stone Age. The EPA will be checking your factories for violations. The Department of Labor will be investigating your hiring practices. They will crawl over every inch of your life and your business, and they will not stop until they find something. And they always find something. The blood in Julian's veins turned to ice. It was a weaponized bureaucracy, a silent, legal, and utterly devastating assault. He was ruined. It wasn't just the deal or his reputation. His entire empire was about to be dismantled, piece by painful piece. Why are you telling me this? Julian whispered. Arthur turned back from the window, his eyes filled not with triumph, but with a profound sadness. Because I want you to understand the scope of your mistake. You thought she was nothing. A zero. You failed to see the value in a person who had sacrificed everything for a cause greater than herself. You, who have sacrificed nothing for anyone, judged her. That is the great irony. In your world of numbers and profits, you failed to calculate the one variable that truly mattered. Character. Arthur Peterson placed a simple business card on the edge of the vast mahogany desk. If you find you need a good lawyer, Mr. Croft, give me a call. My rates are very reasonable, though I suspect you may soon find yourself in need of a public defender. With that, he turned and left, leaving Julian Croft standing alone in the silent sunlit tomb of his own making. 2 days later, Clara was sitting at her small kitchen table, helping Leo with a coloring book, when her phone rang. It was Eleanor Vance from the White House. "Mrs. Vance," she said, her voice warm and efficient, "I have something for you. I hope you'll find it suitable. There is a position opening up at the Regional Veterans Affairs Administration Office. It's an administrative role, a patient advocate coordinator. You'd be helping veterans and their families navigate the healthcare system, scheduling appointments, and ensuring they get the care they are entitled to." Clara's heart leaped. Helping veterans. It felt so right, so fitting. It was a way to honor Michael's memory in her daily life. "The hours are 9 to 5, Monday to Friday," Eleanor continued. "No more nights, no more weekends. And it comes with a full federal benefits package. Comprehensive health insurance, dental, vision, everything. Health insurance. The two most beautiful words in the English language. Tears welled in Clara's eyes. "Yes," she breathed. "Oh yes. Thank you. I don't know how to thank you." "Thank your husband, Mrs. Vance," Eleanor said softly, "and thank the President. He sends his very best and wishes you and your son a bright future." A week later, Clara walked out of the Gilded Sparrow for the last time. She wasn't there as an employee, but to pick up her final paycheck and the meager contents of her locker. Robert, the manager, could barely meet her eye. He mumbled an apology, his face pale with the fear that she now wielded some unimaginable power. The other staff members, however, treated her like a returning hero. Maria hugged her tightly. The head chef, a gruff man named Antoine, came out of the kitchen to shake her hand. "You did good, kid," he said, pressing a small, heavy box into her hand. "For all of us." Inside was a selection of the restaurant's finest pastries. "For your boy," he grunted, before disappearing back into the steam. As she left, she saw a newspaper in a stand by the door. The headline on the business page caught her eye. "Croft Innovations in Freefall. CEO Julian Croft resigns amidst scandal and federal investigations." Below it was a grainy photo of Julian leaving his office building, his face haggard, surrounded by a scrum of reporters. He looked like a defeated man, stripped of his power, his arrogance replaced by a hunted, haunted look. Clara felt a surprising pang, not of pity, but of a strange, detached sadness. He had built an empire, but he had a foundation of sand. He had possessed everything and valued nothing. She folded the newspaper and walked away, leaving his world of gilded cages and brittle power behind for good. Her new job was in a modest government building, a world away from the marble and crystal of the restaurant. The work was challenging, the bureaucracy sometimes frustrating, but the purpose was real. She was no longer just serving food, she was serving heroes. She listened to the stories of old men who had fought in forgotten wars and young men and women still grappling with the invisible wounds of recent conflicts. She helped them get the care they needed, fought for them when the system failed them, and saw in their eyes the same quiet dignity and honor she had known in her husband. Her evenings were no longer filled with anxiety and exhaustion. They were filled with homework and bedtime stories. Leo's health stabilized. With consistent access to the best medications and treatments, the color returned to his cheeks. His breathing eased. The dark circles under his eyes faded. For the first time, Clara could look at her son and see not just a fragile patient, but a thriving, happy child. One afternoon, a few months into her new job, a man approached her desk. He was older, with kind eyes and a familiar face she couldn't quite place. "Mrs. Vance?" he asked. "I don't know if you remember me. My name is Arthur Peterson. I was at the restaurant that night." Clara's eyes widened in recognition. the quiet man from the next table. "I just wanted to tell you," he said, his voice gentle, "that what you did took incredible courage. My wife and I were so moved by your dignity. I'm a lawyer, and I work with a lot of veterans pro bono. When I heard you were working here, I had to stop by and say hello, and to thank you." "Thank me? For what?" Clara asked, confused. "For reminding me what we fight for," he said simply. "It's not about money or power. It's about honor, decency, and looking out for one another. You stood up for all of that in that one small moment." He smiled. "I hear Julian Croft is facing indictment on tax evasion charges. It seems character is, in fact, a rather important variable." They spoke for a while, and Clara found a quiet kinship with this man who understood the world she and Michael had come from. He became a friend, a mentor, and a source of quiet strength. A year passed, the seasons turned, and with them the pages of Clara's life turned to a new, brighter chapter. The frantic anxiety that had been her constant companion for so long had been replaced by a steady, quiet peace. The apartment was still small, but it was no longer a place of fear. It was a home filled with the sound of Leo's laughter. One crisp autumn afternoon, Clara took Leo to the park. He was running, actually running, chasing a bright red ball across a field of fallen leaves. A year ago, such an exertion would have left him breathless and wheezing. Now he was just a normal 8-year-old boy, full of energy and life. She sat on a bench, watching him, a soft smile on her face. She pulled a worn wallet from her purse. Inside, behind a plastic window, was the small, faded photo of her and a young, smiling Michael. The same photo he had shown the president. She traced the outline of his face with her finger. "We're okay, my love," she whispered to the photograph. "We're finally okay. You'd be so proud of your boy." A shadow fell over her and she looked up. A man stood before her, looking hesitant and deeply out of place. He was thinner than she remembered, his expensive suit replaced by simple slacks and a jacket that seemed too big for him. The arrogant fire in his eyes was gone, replaced by a hollow, defeated emptiness. It was Julian Croft. Clara's first instinct was to tense up, a flicker of the old fear and anger returning. But it vanished as quickly as it came. He was no longer a monster to be feared, just a man, broken and adrift. "Mrs. Vance," he said, his voice raspy, unfamiliar without its usual commanding tone. I know this is an intrusion. I had to find you." Clara remained silent, waiting. "My company is gone," he said, stating the obvious. "My reputation, everything I built. I lost it all, and for months I blamed you. I blamed the president, the media, everyone but myself. I was so angry." He looked over at Leo, who had stopped his game and was watching them with a child's open curiosity. "Then one day," Julian continued, his gaze returning to Clara, "I was sitting in my empty office, and I read that letter again. A copy of it was in the legal discovery documents, and I actually read the words. About your husband. About sacrifice. About a man who had a reason for everything." His voice broke. "I had everything, and I had no reason, no purpose beyond just acquiring more. I treated people like numbers on a spreadsheet. I thought that was strength." He shook his head, a gesture of profound self-disgust. "I just wanted to say, I'm sorry, not for what I lost, but for what I did to you, for the disrespect I showed you and the memory of your husband. It was a failure of character so profound I still can't fathom it." Clara looked at this humbled man, and for the first time she saw a flicker of humanity in his haunted eyes. She thought of all the anger she had carried, and she let it go. It no longer had a place in her life. "I accept your apology, Mr. Croft," she said, her voice clear and steady. He seemed stunned, as if he had expected her to scream at him, to rage. He simply nodded, unable to speak. "Leo," Clara called out, her voice bright, "come here, sweetie. Say hello." Leo ran over, his cheeks flushed, and hid shyly behind her legs, peeking out at the strange man. "This is my son, Leo," Clara said, her hand resting protectively on his shoulder. "He's my reason for everything." Julian Croft looked at the bright, healthy child, and then back at the quiet, dignified woman. He finally understood. He had tried to pour the cold water of his bitterness onto a fire, but he had not extinguished it. He had only revealed the strength of its warmth. He had tried to assign her a value of 0, only to discover that she was, in fact, priceless. He gave a final small nod, a gesture of surrender, and perhaps the barest beginning of understanding. Then he turned and walked away, a ghost disappearing into the long shadows of the afternoon, leaving Clara and her son together in the warm golden light.